Hi, and welcome to Completing Cast, the official podcast of Complete and Box Video Games. I'm your host, Spencer, and once again, we are joined by...
Parker!
And today we are talking... Last time in episode 31, we talked about Darksiders. Today in episode 32, game review number 10, by the way. We've done 10.
Milestone.
Big milestone. Big milestone. Oh, yeah. Can't wait to get to 100, you know?
I do have to say, I'm really proud that you didn't do that fake nervous joke that you always do before we start recording.
You know, I thought about it. It went through my head. Every time before we start recording, I go to start it. You know, we're talking the whole time and there's no problems. And I go to press record and I go,
oh, gosh.
Okay.
Oh, boy.
Oh, mommy made me must And the funny thing is, if you do that, then you actually a little tiny bit inside, you get a little tiny bit nervous. So, like, this time I actually didn't do that, and I just started in, and it was great. What a great
It feels
time.
like the official CIB podcast now.
Good. So before it was unofficial. So today, like I said, big milestone here, number 10. We're talking Darksiders 2. Mm-hmm. Now, before I go into the scoring stuff, let me just say this: Darksiders 2 is a heck of a lot different than the first one. This is a game where I got to admit, when I first turned it on, and I won't go too much into this, I was so surprised that I was a little off-put, and then my mind changed up, you know, later down. But when I started, I was like, Darksiders, it's going to be, you know, Legend of Zelda, you know, kind of whatever, and this game is a lot different. In fact, I don't remember the last time I played a sequel where it was like different, right?
Which makes sense, like, if I mean, I don't know if they're really going this way because I don't know much about development and all that, but, like, if it was supposed to be 4 separate horsemen, it would make sense that they're 4 separate games that are not really connected. Because otherwise, it would just be the 4 horsemen and they all have the same name and they're all the same dude. Like, they're all supposed to be very different. So, I mean, it makes sense if they went that route. I'm not sure if they intended it that way or whatever.
But that is definitely the big thing to take from this review. So, really quickly, in terms of our scoring, we base on 6 different categories. Story, gameplay, sound, you know, all the stuff like voice acting, music, all that stuff. You got graphics and atmosphere. You got fun factor and replayability. We grade all these out of 10. We take average score, and that's the average score. The way we do each individual one is a 5 would be completely average, 7 is pretty good, 8 is very good, and 9 doesn't happen too much. I think so far we've probably given 2 or 3 10s for individual categories out of 10 games so far, and this is, again, I can't really think of any of the games besides Resident Evil 6 that I really I'm much more the middle. Like you generally go like way lower or way higher, and I'm usually like, well, I didn't dislike that. I didn't dislike this too much. So that's the scoring on that. All of that can always be seen in the description below. So Darksiders 2, like I said, much different game. First, we're going to talk about the story. A lot of the big differences are going to be, you know, get into gameplay, but we'll get into that in a second.
Right. Well, but I will say, just like going from Arkham Origins to Arkham City, the fact that this is more open world does make the story suffer slightly because there's so much going on and so many side quests that it is hard to keep the thread of the actual main story. I guess
that is so. A gameplay and story are always they're never like completely separate. They're always part of it. So. As we mentioned in Batman Arkham City, it's a big open world game, so the story can seem, in any open world game, it just is what it is, more disjointed, whereas...
Unless you're, like, really serious about, like, just completing story missions and you don't get distracted, like, you can get distracted, and then when you do, you get back to the main story and you go, wait, who's this guy? Or, like, what's this person's deal? And you got a refresher, and so that's
we got to keep that in mind in talking about this. Now... Yeah. Darksiders 1, you played as War. He was a big brute who didn't take, he was a strong horseman who don't need no man. He was
like Doom guy that talks. Like, he just was just like,
pretty much,
I'm not putting up with this. Like,
even huge demon lords, he was like, I'm not putting up with this.
Yeah, exactly.
In this one, you play as Death, who is a much more, I think of I think of death in this. If war is that big brother that's constantly knocking over stuff in the house, death is more civilized. He like almost should have like a monocle and like
right.
talking during high tea and stuff like that. He's much more civilized when he talks about stuff, which is obviously surprising. I would think death is just like blah, blah, I'm death.
Right. But it is more nuanced because he's not like war is like destruction. And like giant, explosions, and it's like, huge groups of people going up against each other and lots of dead bodies. Whereas death is like, death can be part of that, but it's also like a person dying on their deathbed or like a child dying before like it's time and all those things. So death kind of like in some way is like a part of all of that. And so it makes him a lot more even character when it comes to some of that stuff where it's like a lot more nuanced because there's a lot of stuff, a lot of differences and stuff. So he's a lot more interesting than War. Like, War was awesome because you were like, yeah, you knew what he was going to do. But like, Death was like interesting to know what he was going to say next because you were just like, I don't know what he's going to say to this.
And it wasn't, I thought they were going to have him just be bloodthirsty, whatever.
Right.
Just kind of, so there were times where it was like, they were talking about like, you leave, death everywhere you go and whatever. And it seemed like he didn't always like, not necessarily want that, but it was just like part of him where he's like, I can't really,
yeah.
I am where I'm needed, but I don't necessarily.
Yeah, he doesn't want people to die.
Right.
He just is, that's part of this whole thing. So I right off the bat, like introducing his character, like, because in the beginning he is in the first part of the story. It's just like kind of throws you into it. He's like trying to find answers about his brother War, because this game takes place in between when War, like the beginning of Darksiders, when War shows up and everybody's like, "What are you doing here?" And then like he fights Abaddon and then Abaddon gets killed by the Destroyer and all that stuff, and then War gets like pulled away and he's like in this like prison, but he doesn't know how long, and then he comes back to Earth like years and years later and it's all
100 or whatever they said it was.
It was a long time later and everything's bombed out. This story takes place in between that time. So it's while War is like captured. This story takes place, and it leads up to, obviously we all saw at the end of Darksiders when the other three horsemen are showing up. It kind of like ends at the same point there. So when it starts out, he's just trying to be like, I gotta clear my brother's name. So at first he is kind of just like, I don't want to take any of your crap, and I thought they were just gonna kind of go that same route. But then like more listening to him talk, it was a lot more like he was like not just like dismissing people because he's tough. He was like basically like, kind of getting people to go back on their own words, or like tricking, kind of even just talking, like debating with people, like using words. And so that was pretty cool. I was like, dude, I like this guy. Like, he seemed pretty interesting right off the bat.
Yeah, I really liked Death's character, and you meet a lot of so Darksiders 1 is all on Earth.
Right.
Everything's on Earth except for, I think everything's on Earth. Everything's on Earth.
Yeah.
100 years after the fact. This one takes place in a lot of different areas.
Right.
And that's a huge point of it. A lot of different, I don't know what you would call them. Like when you go
like
in
worlds. I mean, whatever.
When you go into those portals, it like seems like you're like physically like beneath maybe, or
it's
like
almost it's like
planes.
Other dimensions, planes, like different things. Because like you go to the first world you go to is the Maker's world, and that's like I mean, Darksiders kind of had like some of that like biblical references, and then in this game, like, but there was still a bunch of stuff in Darksiders 1 where it was like, okay, well, clearly it's not really like based on anything, it's just kind of using some themes, whereas this like pretty much throws all that out the window, where it's like just a world that they're creating. Because I mean, like in this thing there's a plane of existence, or a world, or whatever you want to call it, called the Maker's World, and they literally build worlds, and they built Earth. Like, they built all these places that people live in, because the makers apparently have been around since before the Nephilim were around, which is what the horsemen are. Like, they've been around forever, and they've basically created it. So it's like pseudo, like, oh, this is what people would call God. Like, this is the thing creating Earth or creating worlds and all this stuff. And it's like, so it's kind of like, kind of far out sci-fi fantasy kind of thing. But yeah, so that's like the first world they go to. And then he shows up there. Basically, he gets introduced to this guy, this crow father, who's like just a guy who has all the answers. Like, they present him as like a guy that's just like, he knows everything that there is to know. And so he shows up to him to be like, how do I help my brother? Like, I need to know. And so he gives you like some kind of vague hints, because he also doesn't want you to know, and you don't really know what his motives are. Clearly, he doesn't like you right off the bat. So you go, then you get sent to this maker's world, and you talk to them, and you kind of, again, like, because it's open world and you're jumping around, when you get there, you're immediately, like, given a bunch of tasks. And Death kind of, like, makes a fun of it. He's like, I don't have time for this. Like, constantly he's, like, annoyed at all these people's problems, because he's like...
And that's one of the parts, if we're talking about story and characters and all that stuff, that's one of the parts where this game actually shines for me. Mm-hmm. A lot of the characters, especially specifically the Maker's World, are very, like, interesting and funny and whatever. Like, you meet I always forget the names, but the guy who always forgets the stuff, he'll be like, I lost this in my
Pup. They call him Pup.
They call him Pup. So he's literally eons old, but to them he's young.
Oh yeah, he's
even though he's like a billion years old.
Right.
So it's funny. Like, you meet him. He's like who's that guy in the first game who made the sword for you at the end?
Well, and that guy is from that same race of people.
Right.
So he's definitely reminds you of that.
Very, very similar. But like I said, you meet these guys, and it's like I said, these guys are calling this dude a pup, and he's like 50 feet tall and whatever.
Oh yeah, all of them are massive.
And as is every single open world game that I've played, it eventually comes to a bunch of tasks.
Right.
From beat this, fetch this, whatever.
Exactly.
It's just the way these games have to go.
Yeah.
And again, that goes more into the gameplay, but it is funny how, like, they'll be like, for me to have you do this, first you have to get this water flowing through this thing.
Right.
And he's like, seriously.
And he's like, then he gets the water flowing, and it's like, great, are we done? And it's like, well, no, of course not. You can't do anything with just water.
You need lava too.
It's
Come
like,
on. And he's like,
are you kidding me?
And that's how a lot of, at least the very beginning, goes. And again, that's how these type of games go. It is games that are open world like this always end up that way. But I really enjoyed the scenery in a lot of these, especially the Maker's World. I enjoyed meeting all the different guys.
Very pretty.
I enjoyed just in general the interactions that Death had with all these people. You would find one of that pup guys. He would always in every mini dungeon lose something, and you'd find it, bring it back to him, and be like, you'd sarcastically be like, I found it, and you'd be like, I'd lose my head if it wasn't attached to me, kind of thing. And it's like, these are like, technically like eons old, like creators of worlds, and they're like have these humanistic characteristics, and that was really endearing. So again,
and there's that one like blacksmith guy that like doesn't talk, but you could go up to him and keep hitting talk, and he just like makes grunts. He's just like,
and then you go to his sister, and you go, that's a very minor part about this game. You have, when you talk to someone, you have kind of dialogue choices.
Right.
it's nothing like a Mass Effect.
Yeah, it's
where
not
it's like,
dialogue choices. It's just like,
finding
do
more
you want to
info.
bother finding out this info or not? Because it went nice enough, like, because I think this game is definitely set up so that you play it many times, and so because of that, like, dialogue choices in blue are like the ones that actually give you missions. The ones in white, you don't really have to do them. Like, that's just like, if you want to listen to that, you can, but it's not going to hurt you or help you. It's just going to be like more story for you to find out.
And sometimes the stuff, is funny or endearing or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, you talk to that sister, and you're like, your brother doesn't talk much, does he? And she's like,
yeah, and then like you go on a quest to find this like real specific hammer for him to like make like like his like the like a smith's hammer, and you find this awesome one, and he's just like really thankful, and he's just like, it's like, she's like, wow, he's very thankful. It's like, that's funny.
And that's another thing that I especially liked about, because this game gets generally dark pretty fast. You essentially start in the lightest, like literally the lightest place, where like there's a lot of like goodness going on and whatever, and it ends
Right.
up being, into a pretty,
Yeah,
crazy
it gets more and more grim as
That's
time
what I
goes
like
on,
about the
sure.
interactions with this game with death. Like, not a single character you meet is, like, afraid of you.
Mm-hmm.
They go from in the beginning just being like, oh, you puny little young horseman, to
Right.
at the end just being like, I fear not death, for
Right.
I am a devil, kind of thing.
Right,
And
right.
it's just
but at the same time, like, I think it's one of those things that's interesting because it's like they all do acknowledge though that like when death shows up somewhere, it's because like, well, that's it for us. Like when you first get to the Maker's World, the guy's kind of like, well, I've been waiting for you to show up. Like they can see that their world is dying. They're not dumb. I mean, they build worlds for a living, so they can tell when a world's dying, and they like see that corruption's taking over, and so they're like, he's just like, okay, well, I knew you'd be coming sooner or later, but at the same time, they're not scared of him. It's just kind of like death is, like a way of life. I mean, not to be punny, but like death is a way of life. Like it's these people know it, and the characters you meet in this are all so time spanning. They're all so massive. It's not just like a human with like 80 years on Earth kind of thing. Like these are beings that have lived for eons. So like when they see death, they're not really scared of them because they know it's inevitability that they're going to die at some point. They might be trying to stop that or trying to make the most of what they have, but they're like aware of him, but they're not scared of him. They're just like, it is what it is, it's just a way of life,
Yeah, and that's, like I said, I really like the Maker's World and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
so now,
for sure.
eventually...
Right, so the whole thing, you're trying to get to the Tree of Life. You're given the hint that that you need to get to the Tree of Life, because if you remember, the one of the few things they pulled from the Bible still, in the biblical themes that they have in these games, is in the Garden of Eden there was the Tree of Knowledge and the Tree of Life. They Adam and Eve were told not to eat either tree. They of course eat the Tree of Knowledge. They're given the knowledge of good and evil, and then they are kicked out of the Garden of Eden before they could eat of the Tree of Life. Because if they eat the Tree of Life, then they would become like a god at that point, because they'd have the knowledge and they'd have the life. So they're kicked out before that can happen. So the Tree of Life still exists. It wasn't destroyed, because the Maker's World is basically like, and they mention it in Darksiders 1. The Garden of Eden was saved by that one guy that you met in the tower who was like trapped.
Yeah,
he kind of like saved it because he like
Angaron or just something.
So he like saved it. So you go and you go to, and so the Tree of Life still is around, and so they're like, you need to go to the Tree of Life because it will give you answers, basically. Like it's you need to find more info about this Tree of Life or whatever, because Death's whole thing is if he can like prove that war is innocent, is still like, he doesn't think he has too much of a leg to stand on there. So what he does is, what he intends to do is bring back Earth to make it exactly the way it was, and like before everything went to hell, literally. and so his plan is to like find out how to do that. So like he wants to like find something in the universe that's like maybe can grant a wish, or something that can just restore life, or something that can turn back time. He doesn't know what it is. He just knows he needs to find something that can restore Earth to what it was before heaven and hell decided to have a war on it. And so that's his whole plan. He's like, if I can restore Earth, then I can worry about trying to get war out of jail, basically. And so that's what he's setting out to do. So he gets some information that the Tree of Life is the way to go. So in the Maker's World, you do a bunch of stuff, and you finally get to the Tree of Life, and then you get go to the portal, and then there's this like side thing where you get yanked through, and you get introduced to Absalom, which is, he's the first. You're from the race of Nephilim, and he's the very first Nephilim that was ever created. So another biblical theme is the Nephilim were a combination of angels and humans, and so they're like an in-between race where they have the power of an angel, like these heavenly beings, but they also have like the side of humanity that gives them free will and some other things, so they can like do stuff. And like Nephilim are like like in some scholarly stuff, it's like they're the name of people that like did great events, like in kind of that like mythology type stuff. So like anybody that did something crazy huge was probably some like descendant of a Nephilim or something, because they're like much bigger than normal people and much more powerful and whatever. So Absalom was the first one created. Obviously a bunch more were created. You four were created: war, death, famine, and strife. And you four decide that the Nephilim are out of control, and you and your brothers and your sister band together and say, let's kill off all the Nephilim. So you kill all the other Nephilim minus you guys, and that's why you're given the titles of the Four Horsemen, because you like helped save basically the universe from the Nephilim just taking over and just whatever, because they were too powerful. And so you meet Absalom, and he's still pissed that you killed off all the Nephilim. Well, understandably.
Right.
He's been, unfortunately, what has been happening is that all the souls of the Nephilim have been contained in a crystal that the Crowfather, like, in the beginning of the game, kind of, like, tricked into embedding inside of you. And so you have this, like, crystal in you that contains, like, all the souls of the Nephilim, and you carry it with you, this burden. And like, whereas war might have been able to carry that burden and be like, who cares? Like, I don't care. Like, I got more important things to worry about. Death is a lot more like, like he's a lot more aware of like what's just or not just, but like what's like he has guilt about things, and he feels bad that he killed all of his like family basically and all the race of people that he's from. So he does feel guilty about that. So they introduce Absalom just to show that there's like this dude that you need to be aware of because he's around.
Right.
And then you go into the Kingdom of the Dead.
Very cool. Very, very cool setting again.
Right.
This is the point where you get to the point that I think there are 3, if I'm correct, like different, decently large.
There might
4.
be 4.
There might be 4.
Yeah, there's 4.
There's the Makers, the Kingdom of the Dead. There's the
then there's Angel World, Lost Light, and then there's the Demon World.
Like the Demon World, right. Okay, and they're all unique, and
Right.
and I think this goes a little bit into the game, into the story as well. They're all unique, and they all have unique characters. A lot of the people in the Kingdom of the Dead are like skeletons and stuff, and it's cool. I like that kind of stuff. I'll always be a fan of that. Necromancy race in games and stuff.
Absolutely.
Like that.
Yeah, and you meet a lot, and like just like Darksiders 1, the character design is cool. So all the enemies are cool, and they're all very different when you go to different places. Sometimes there's the similar enemy, but they're kind of like a version. Like you might meet like the one enemy, but then when you're in the Kingdom of the Dead, you meet that like an undead version of that enemy. But then there's also other enemies that are just completely new. But yeah, Kingdom of the Dead's really neat. It's like all creepy gothic stuff, and buildings made of bones and all sorts of craziness, and so very different feel. But yeah, you get there and you again got to go through a bunch of tasks. You want to talk to this like Kingdom of the Bones or whatever, the king, and you need to do some stuff in order to get counsel with him, and then you get your counsel, and he tells you about basically gives you the information about there being 2 keys to unlock the door to the tree. One is an angel key and one is a demon key. And you need to get both those keys in order to unlock it. So he gives you some hints as to where those might be. Lost Light, which is this like angel town, but it's not really. It's like an angel like sanctuary separate, because it's like the White City is where the angels are from, and that's like that's where like Uriel and some of those people from Darksiders 1 who do appear in this one from like the Hell Guard and all that, they live in the White City. That's like basically like just outside of heaven or whatever, and that's like where the angels all live. And Lost Light is kind of like just like a separate world that like they can conduct their business or whatever. Like they don't really explain it too much, but they kind of just give you a little bit of like, oh, it's this, so it's like fallen angels, there's like good angels, there's bad angels there. So it's just kind of like a catch-all for like angels to like that aren't part of the Hellguard or part of like, the whatever other like official stuff. This is like where they live otherwise.
And one of the things when we're talking about the story specifically, like we said, open world games like this, it's hard to deal with the story. So when Parker mentioned, oh, you get to the Kingdom of the Dead and you talk to the king who asks you to do some stuff, that some stuff is it's a lot. So like I'm trying to I gotta be honest,
Absolutely.
like because of the way this game is set up and because of the way that you have so much you can do, and I'm not even gonna use the excuse like I don't have the time. I just don't really have the patience to play the same game for a long period of time. So when he said that some stuff, it's one of the things is you have to find these 3 souls to be judged, and it's like that's a huge thing.
Right. Like so you gotta find 3 souls. You go to each one, and then when you get to the soul, he's like, do these 3 things for me, and then I'll come with you. So it's like, it becomes 9 things you need to do, and it's like,
that's more gameplay, but it absolutely affects story, because at the end, honestly, because I don't play games... I don't play games like this a lot. Like, I would be like, what was my main task? And then you would finally get all 3 of the souls judged, and you're like... Oh, yeah. And, like, literally, it's just like, again, we have to... the game is far too long to say everything you do, so you have to, gloss it over and be like, well, he wants you to do some stuff, and then you get these keys. But that stuff was, like, probably took me a week.
It's crazy.
Or, like,
at
least a week.
And if you're the kind of person, if you're an adult, you have adult responsibilities, you probably might not find play sessions every single day. So you might have a play session a week apart. And it's like, when you have something where you had to do 9 tasks, when you're on the, like, 7th one, you're like, and you took a break, you're going to be like, so what was all this for? And then when you get back, it's just like, you're like, wait, what? Like, because the whole thing was just like, this guy's like, oh, I'm suffering, and I had these 3 guys that were helping me suffer, but now they like ran off because they didn't feel like suffering, and it's like, go get them, and you get them, and then they're like, okay, we're here, and they're like, you gotta suffer, and it's like, what? Like, usually it's very like, what's happening? But again, you're just kind of like rolling with it because you're like, whatever. You get this big story points, and you just move on to the next thing.
Sometimes the big story points are far apart, though.
Yeah,
I guess is the major point.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're just like, oh, that's right. That's what I'm doing. Like, so, now I remember. At
this point, you have to get the angel and the demon key.
Right. Yeah.
And
you're like, okay, you get this hint about lost light, so you go over there, angel world. Of course, the angels don't want anything to do with you. So you go over there and you're talking to them. Luckily, you find one dude that's like on your side, and he tells you to go talk. And like, this is another thing where it's like, you just need the key, you just need this angel key, right? And then you get embroiled in this like angel thing, like where like they're like, oh, there's this angel, and he took the something. Oh, like
the one on the top of the tower.
Well, yeah, that ends up being the bad guy. But at first, you're like, oh, go talk to the Archon, who's this, like, all-gold guy. And he's like, oh, this angel over here, like, is a jerk. And then you go and you talk to him, and he's like, no, it's the Archon. That was the jerk. And it's like, oh, and you go back, and the Archon's like, ha-ha, I was the jerk. And it's like, okay.
And again, that's a lot of gameplay for that part.
Yes.
That's a lot
and
of gameplay.
You go through all this or whatever, and you go back and forth and back and forth. And at one point, you get sent to Earth. So this is an in-between time. This is before war comes back. But you show up at Earth and you meet Uriel, who is the female angel that War meets in the first one. That she's part of that ending sequence when you defeat the Destroyer, and then you defeat the Abaddon himself. And then they, had a maybe romance with that Uriel. And then she's there to, stab you in the back when what's his name? The guy Mark Hamill voiced.
Yeah, the guy who follows you around.
Yeah, the guy that follows you around. When he's she stabs you through the heart. and then that's how you're able to like break free of his grasp and stuff. So she has a story, like she's important to that story. So she shows back up. You get sent to Earth basically to find the Archon tells you need to rebuild this staff, and you do it. But so you get this moment where you go down to Earth and you're like, oh, cool, like it's like Darksiders 1, and you're like running around there, and then you get sent back to Lost Light, and then you finish out that part, and you get the key finally from the Archon after like basically equipping him. Like you give him this, you rebuild this rod, you give it to him, and then he uses it to like lay waste to you. It's like, okay, great. And so so then you finally get the first key. And then the second key, they're like, oh, it's over at the Kingdom of the Demons. So you got to go over to Samael. So they bring him back. And you're basically going to where Samael, like...
It's hard to... Let me say it's hard to explain this because the game gets into a little bit of time travel at this point.
Yes.
So...
like kind of slight time travel. So you get that, I don't want to go in the gameplay stuff, but you do get that same kind of thing where you could shoot portals, which like you could shoot in the first one. But then they give you this twist where you could shoot a portal that lets you jump through, and then you jump back out that same portal, but back in time or forward in time. And you can kind of jump back and forth in that regard.
The current time you're at, Samael was defeated for whatever reason.
He's been, if we remember from Darksiders 1, he is currently being captured, and his heart is in like a bunch of places.
Okay,
and
so that makes a little more sense to me now.
So he's kind of like locked up or whatever. And what has happened is his kingdom, Samael's kingdom, since he's like sort of absent or whatever, is like basically like corruption is taking over. So the same corruption that was in Darksiders 1, and the same corruption that was on the Maker's World, the same corruption that was on the Kingdom of the Dead, all worlds are being consumed by this corruption. And it's very vaguely reminiscent of if you ever watched like Neverending Story or something, but it's like the nothingness, and it's all this stuff about like just everything's just being
they represent it as pretty much literally blackness.
Right. And like
Goop,
it's definitely like right. But it's definitely like the same thing, like, entropy or whatever, just like everything eventually just goes back to just nothing. It just all falls apart. Like whatever little bit of order you try to create just eventually falls apart. And that's just what this corruption represents. So you show up at this Samael's palace, and it's falling apart. And then you finally meet this character, which is, I was annoyed at the Darksiders 1. You meet Lilith. They introduce this character Lilith, and Lilith, if you know a bit about like some not actual biblical stuff, but like extracurricular texts surrounding the Bible. Supposedly there was a first woman created by God for Adam. And she was created in the exact same way that Adam was created. So, like, just a person brought up from the dirt. But, like, in no way connected to Adam. And they are partners for a while, but eventually Lilith is like, look, I'm my own person. I do what I want. And so then God's like, oh, scrap you. So he throws Lilith out and then pulls Adam's rib out and makes Eve from Adam. And it's like this whole connection thing, and then that's what makes Adam and Eve work a lot better together, because it's like, oh, you guys are connected by this thing. Whereas Lilith is like, I don't need no man. And so she's like, I'll do what I want. But so she gets kicked out, but she doesn't get killed. But then, so there's this whole thing that Lilith went on to, do all sorts of nonsense. But in this story, what she went on to do was basically create the Nephilim. So she went on to maybe seduce an angel and whatever, and create the Nephilim, and so she's like the mother of all the Nephilim, and so she's like kind of seductress, succubus, evil sort of thing, but she's also your mom. It's just like a weird thing. But if you remember from Darksiders 1, there was this thing where the whole story was about Abaddon being seduced to being, do you want to rule hell or do you want to serve heaven? That was like the whole thing we kept talking about.
Right.
And it was like some in one cutscene there was a female's voice
Oh
that talked to him.
my god, seriously?
So that's Lilith. But
Oh,
there's
wow.
no reference to it,
Wow.
and there's no explanation to that.
Because I remember we talked about that in the previous episode.
Right.
Wow.
So she like mentioned some Abaddon stuff, and then like, and I had found out about her because when I was like playing Darksiders 1, I like looked up to be like, what was that female voice? Because I'm like, was it Uriel? Because that was the only major female they introduced. Really, was that female angel, and I'm like, that wouldn't make sense that she was like tempting Abaddon. So I was like, that what? And I looked it up, and it was like, this is Lilith, but it's like uncredited. And so I was like, okay, I don't want to look any further because it must be a Darksiders 2 thing. So I assumed it was going to be just like a thing where it's like, ooh, maybe we'll talk about this later to keep you on. But like I said in Darksiders 1, I was annoyed that I was like, yeah, but they didn't really present it as like, let's find out what that is. They just kind of like just didn't explain it, which I didn't like. And then in this one, if you like read into some of the stuff she says, you're like, oh, okay, that sort of explains it. But it's like, you really had to like look it up basically. Because it's like, it wasn't very explicit, you know what I mean? And I don't want a game to like necessarily, I don't want a story to necessarily like handhold. But at some point you're like, I don't even have it. Like if you played Darksiders 1 like a million years ago, you know, potentially, you would not remember that one scene where there was a female's voice and it didn't say Lilith. Like if it would have said it in the subtitles, Lilith, then you would have been like, oh, who's that? Like you had no reason to know it was her, but whatever. So she's in Samael's palace and she's kind of just like hiding out there. She basically like swooped in and stole the seat of power after Samael gets captured. So she has her own little kingdom, but it's all falling apart and crumbling or whatever. But she's the one that gives you that power to like jump back in time so that you can go and, you know, get this key from Samael.
So you eventually go through
you go
dungeon,
back and forth.
You eventually meet Samael in the past.
In the past, and you beat him, and you get this, and you get the key. And then finally, you got the 2 keys, and you can finally go to the door. But then, like, there's a lot of, like, I mean, some of it's even somewhat story-based, but there's a lot of things you can do before you go open that door. Like, a lot of things you can, like, fires you can put out, a lot of, like, things you can wrap up. Like, there's a couple of, like, kind of, like, story things, like, way back in Maker's World, I don't even know if you did this, but you could fight that.
I did nothing side quest.
Okay, you could fight that, the guy that trained you, the one maker that was, like, always swinging his axe and smashing stuff. You could fight him, and, like you when you talk to him to train, you could also talk to him to fight him.
I did that.
Okay, and when you fight him, he's then like, wow, you're powerful. Here's these 4 things you can fight. And they all are, like, pretty story-based. And a couple of them you actually beat in the story mission. One of them was like that, there was that spider thing in, I think it was either in the Kingdom of the Damned or it was in the demon area. But there's like you fought 2 dudes. It was like a guy riding on a spider.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
And so Echidna the spider is one of the 4 things that he like tells you that, you know, like, oh, you need to kill this person because, like, you know, like they're he gives you this reason where it's like to prove yourself or whatever, you got to kill these 4 like lost souls or whatever. And so you go around and you kill them all or whatever. But like I said, even if you just do the story mission, you do end up killing one of the 3 or one of the 4, and then the other 3 you got to go track down and kill. But so there's like a lot to do. So like but like when you open the door, it's pretty much like you open the door to go into the Tree of Life finally, and you were told that this whole thing is to get to the Well of Souls, and the Well of Souls is this basically what it sounds like. It's a big well of souls, but what it is like potentially all the souls from everybody that's ever died goes to this Well of Souls. So if you go to the Well of Souls, you could potentially resurrect all of Earth that way. But there's this, like, I mean, you don't end up making a choice, because it's not like anything like you don't have actual choice-based stuff. But there is like they keep pushing this whole idea of the Nephilim and you having killed them and carrying this burden, because one of the other options is you can resurrect the Nephilim. So it's like, they keep going back and forth, and Lilith tries to seduce you to do that because she, like, of course, wants all of her children to come back to life, and because she would be able to rule over them as their mother. But, like, so there's this whole thing where it's, like, barely a choice. It's kind of like, when we played RE7, and it's like, oh, they introduced this other character. Don't you want to save her over your wife? And it's like, I mean, even though Spencer did,
I did.
Normal people were like, of course. The whole thing is saving my wife. But whatever. So it's that idea, but they don't really even give you a choice. It's not like, it's just, you're just watching it play out or whatever. So when you go to the Well of Souls, you go in there and you, of course, choose Earth. But, of course, when you do that, Absalom, that first Nephilim guy that they introduced way back in the beginning, is, like, there. And he's like, no, you're not going to defeat all of us and like, let us go or whatever. Like, you have to bring us back, and you killed us and giving you a guilt trip and all that. And you, of course, then that's like the final boss or whatever. So you fight him and you kill him, and then you get to the Well of Souls, you resurrect Earth, presumably, or you get the ball rolling, and then that's when you're like kind of summoned to Earth at that last part.
Right, so it suddenly cuts to that last part of Darksiders 1,
right,
where War's like, not just me, and then the other three come in. I gotta say, I was very disappointed in how quickly the ending went.
Right.
It was very, like, by the time you beat the final boss, it was probably like legit 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Of being like,
and it wasn't even.
I thought it was gonna be a big choice.
I wonder if they ran out of like money because it wasn't even. It wasn't even animated. It was like the image, the still images.
That's right.
It was a storybook, which they had done earlier in the game, so it's not like it was like completely out of left field. But like to have the ending be like, whoosh, whoosh, just these like
it was
sort
just,
of animated storybooks.
Because you had the two choices were resurrect. You said the Nephilim or save the Earth, and he chooses the Earth to get his brother.
Right.
But again, the way they presented it, I was like, oh man, I get to make a choice. No, and it just kind of goes through, like I said, very, very, very quick. So it left, for a very long game, it left a very, because, they were like, once you go in here, there's no turning back, so you're like, okay, final boss, whatever. But then it ends very quick. I do like how it leads to, at the very end, where War's like, blah, 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 not just me, and then you see them coming through, and one of them's death, and his story now, and that's cool.
Right.
Which leads me to believe if they made 2 more, that would probably be the penultimate, moment, where the third and fourth guys would probably they would show something in the past leading up to this, because why now that they showed that scene in 2 games, why would they possibly show stuff after that for famine and whatever, if they made them again, they're leading up to this, why would they be like, well, 1,000 years later,
right. I would have thought that they would have been part of the fight to put things back to order. So that would be the next 2 games, would be like, from that point, because clearly, even though the Earth's been resurrected, the heaven and hell are still embroiled in this ridiculous war that they started based off of Abaddon just kind of wanting to be a ruler in hell, so he started this whole war and whatever. So it's like they'd finally get that squared away, and then it's like, all right, now we have to set about putting the world back. I guess, or the universe.
I guess
that
makes sense. They could. I guess the first one, strife, is essentially just meaning hardship or whatever.
Right.
So maybe strife could be the next one where it's I need to work on this hardship, and then the last one, I guess, could be famine. They could do it either way because they're both essentially, if they play it literally, they're both essentially very similar.
Right.
Because famine is strife.
Right.
Although strife isn't necessarily, famine.
Yeah, exactly. There is one last, you might have skipped past it. There is a post-credit sequence that if you wait, but it doesn't really give you too much, but it does definitely give you, a sequel kind of thing, which obviously, was not meant to be at the time anyway, because Nordic went under, I guess, right? Or whatever.
Right.
So, but what it is you see Lilith, and she's talking to a shadowy figure, and she refers to the shadowy figure as Prince, my prince. I'm so sorry, my prince. And the shadowy figure's like, that he's like anger. He's like, the Nephilim have been lost to us, and it's like, yes, I'm so sorry, and also humanity has been restored. And he's like, ugh. And then she like, it's weird. She kind of gives this like, she kind of half smiles and is like, I'm ready for my punishment, and smiles a little bit. So you're like, this girl's messed up. Like she like wants to be punished. Like she's got a lot going on, or whatever. And then the guy's like, you will receive no pleasure from this. And then she starts screaming, and then it cuts out. So clearly there's like this other being that's like not the Abaddon and the Destroyer and all that. Like potentially it's somebody that's like puppeteering even higher up. So they present that idea that there's like this person that's like really pissed that war and then death both messed up his plans, and he's like, ugh. So that could definitely be, the strife, famine, threads is like, not only do we have to put the world back in order, but we got to stop this, whatever Illuminati kind of nonsense that's happening, where there's like this even higher up guy.
So I would say that's spent a pretty decent amount of time on the story and all that. I would say my general takeaway is very disappointed with the ending. However, the settings, the characters, all that stuff is very cool. I think for what it was, the type of game it is, it does it pretty well. It has, unique locations. It has unique things to do. Games like this is so, games with huge quests like this are so hard to be like, what was I doing? Because again, if one thing always ends up being one thing, then it's a fetch quest game, and all you're doing is go grab this, come back. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it'll be like, it's real life. I have a problem. To fix this problem, I need to do 4 more things, which is great gameplay-wise, but really hurts its story. The one thing I will say in a positive is that it does makes Darksiders 1, like the ending of it, make more sense, where you're like, oh cool, well now I understand this a little more. Right. And it does, like Parker said, lead to like some obvious sequel stuff where you're like, oh cool, and again, I now that you said it, I see it fully, where it's like, now we don't need to know anything really else about the past.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe the point, far back, maybe, but even then, like, that kind of was covered in Death's story.
Yeah, and so, it's like, it's not really necessary, so they could start at that moment and be like, yeah. And then maybe for some reason they could have to cut them, because you can't have all 4 of them together. That would be, it wouldn't be a game, because it'd be like, and everything's saved, But maybe they all come back and now it's like they're all sent to different universes, whatever.
Or it could be, like, it might be interesting to be like, there's so much work that it's 4 people's work, right? And so while you're doing Famine and Strife's work, you do interact with War and Death as they're also doing what they need to do. Hey, so you're not necessarily working together, or maybe there is certain paths where you're working together. It could, it might be interesting. I don't know.
That'd be cool, and they have been talking about, since these remakes did pretty good, that, maybe getting something going on, so that would be great. I mean, I was always disappointed before I even played the games of being like, there are literally 4 horsemen and there are 2 games.
And there's 2 games.
It was like, absolutely. It triggered. It's just like, then make something about the 2 brothers and then you make 2 games. So overall, like I said, I still look at it as a pretty positive thing in terms of the story overall. I think I'm looking about a 7 overall for that. So
I'm gonna bump it down to a 6, unfortunately, because a lot of that story stuff that I'm like, that I'm going through, a lot of it ended up me like looking up stuff and reading. Like, it ended up being a fairly decent story when I finally saw it for what it was, but it wasn't presented in the game. Like, I mean, at most you're getting these like short conversations with some of the characters where they're like giving you tidbits of information, but then you get them like, days, play sessions apart. So you gotta like slowly piece this stuff together. Like, it clearly was a game that was made for the potential would be that you would be playing it over and over, and we'll get into that with gameplay and replayability, I guess. They definitely created it that way. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that, but like, that seems sort of lame to be like, oh, well, you're never going to know the whole story until you play it 10 times. Like, okay, that's
one of those things that I would not.
That's not acceptable.
I considered when you said 6, because you had to look it up, and again, I came into this telling Parker, I don't really remember much of the story because it was so long in between stuff.
Right.
Although I wasn't sure what of that was the game and what of that was just my attention span, So
yeah,
I considered bumping it down a little, but I'm going to keep it at the same 7 just because I really like the setting. I really like the world that they build in that.
Right.
So, moving on to gameplay then.
Mm-hmm.
2 major takeaways from this is the first one was a mixture of like a Legend of Zelda and like a God of War kind of thing. The game plays, and this is a really good thing to do in both games, the game plays like the character. Yeah. War is a big dude, he's not very fast, and it plays like that.
Yep.
Death is very agile, very quick, very agile. One of my
There's no blocking in this, there's only dodging.
Right. That's one of my favorite moves in any game is that like double and triple jump you do by pressing R1 is like a great way to get around, and I just really like it. The best way to explain it, if the first one is Zelda and God of War, the second one is Prince of Persia and God of War. It's very obvious if you've ever played. If you ever played the Prince of Persias for PS2 or Xbox, it's although I really find that with Prince of Persia, it's a 15-year-old game at this point.
Right.
There, it's a little limited in that like you don't have a whole bunch of other items to help you along. It's just okay. Let's figure this out. I have what a very talented human would have. Right. I mean, in the realm of possibility. Right. But this one's like, okay, I have this Prince of Persia type moves. I can always, really, really run along the walls, really, really jump along. I can't stress that enough. Like, it's like you feel very acrobatic. Yes. But then later in the game, it's like, okay, I have this, but now also I have this ability to do the portal thing. They bring the portal gun back.
And like there's like a chain thing.
A chain you can go on. So
grab like these hoops or whatever. And there's a lot.
Prince of Persia, one of the things I always remember about it, and it hasn't been probably 7-8 years since I played it, is you enter a room and it's a big room, it kind of shows you it and you're like, how do I get from A to B? Yeah. This is even crazier because it's not even just how do I get from A to B while I'm a human. It's like, oh well, you could get to a part and then have to go back in time. Right. So it makes
But there is still one solution. So it's like not like Portal where you're like, well, I can figure this out any number of ways. It is like, I'm still finding a specific solution. So
it is, and some of the, again, I feel like a lot of this was explaining a story. It's a very open world game. Right. It has a lot of dungeons. A
lot of optional dungeons, which makes it even crazier. Like, when you played Darksiders 1, there might have been a couple optional dungeons, but I don't think that was even really a thing. Yeah. Most of the dungeons gave you, like, a specific item. And in this, like, there's a couple of dungeons that give you the couple of specific items. Like the Soul Splitter, the grappling hook, and the portal gun. I think that's pretty much it. And you just get 3 items.
Here's the great thing they did with that. If this world, the way it's set up, had war, it would be the worst game of all time. Right. Not even just because of how big it is, but just because of like they made a character that clearly could do all this stuff. So when you start off with war, you're like not strong. Right. You're Samus and Metroid. You're not strong. Right. You can't do anything. And then each time in a dungeon, you'll be like, oh, I have a boomerang. Now I can do all this boomerang stuff. Right. Really, there's like not much you can't do early on as Death. Right. And they do a really good job of like just being like right away being like, you can run along stuff. You can go crazy and all that. Yep.
It's only you have your horse right off the bat. So you can ride around and get places quickly and all that.
It's only that very specific stuff where it's like, okay, well now we have this, this portal gun now. Right. But like for the most part, they do a really good job of that. I gotta say, I forget exactly. I think it was the part where, in story-wise, before you go back to Absalon, the angel that was overtaken by that. I think this is the dungeon I'm thinking of. It's a very like. I think it's where you first get the portal gun or whatever. So you're in this big angelic place, and it's just like so complicated.
That's in Lost Light.
Yeah, that's in Lost Light, right? So like something like that is like that took me 2 or 3 days to go through one dungeon. It was just like you would enter this room and it's just huge, and it's like how do I get from here to here?
Yeah,
and it was
a
just
lot of
I cannot
a lot of
like
switches.
A lot of
you got to throw a bomb.
The big thing with that one, I think we're on the same page, is you have to clean up the water supply. Yes. Well, to do that, you have to do a million things, and it's just
the
like
whole thing was there's these 2 glowing globes, and you had to have them when they were next to each other. They would interact and like dispel corruption. But a lot of times they were all the way across the map. luckily there was a portal near each of them, so you had to shoot a portal on the one, and then you had to slowly make your way all the way over to the other one and shoot a portal, and then they would connect again.
And it
was so many different things you had to do.
Crazy. Yeah. The one that I'll always remember because it took forever was where you have to like spin this little circular chamber around,
absolutely.
and the chamber has like,
and at that point you have the soul splitter, so you got to do things where you're like split up into two people.
That's a huge thing that they have in. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. It's you split up into two, and the one can go and like pull a crank, but then hold it.
Right.
So say if it's one of those cranks that would let go, and then the other one does whatever. So
or like a pressure plate or whatever.
You have this soul splitter.
Right.
You have this portal gun, and you have to find a way to get this, you know, from point A, from this light from point A to point B.
Right.
And I just cannot even begin to go on how complicated it is. It's
and also
complicated.
keep in mind that when you soul split, it leaves this statue behind of death, which also has weight. So that brings in the thing that's also a thing where sometimes you'll either put it on a pressure plate or you eventually soul split on top of a box. And then when you soul split, you could push that box through a door.
Then you unsoul split, and then the original death is
right.
there.
And it's
so crazy. So when I was playing through the game and they added the dang past future, I was like, dude. Like, luckily it was only...
It was pretty minor.
It was pretty minor, and it was only in... At least in the main
dungeon.
story,
right.
one dungeon.
Yeah.
But when they were like, oh, well, you can also soul split and then jump into the past, I was like, dude. You know, and again, it's a good thing.
Right.
I don't want to say that like it's complicated in a bad way because it was interesting. It's a very puzzly game, and like I said, that soul split is what a great idea.
Yeah.
Like, it's
and there's also this mechanic of the soul split. You can't get too far away from the base statue.
Yes.
So sometimes you have to pay attention to where you're beginning the soul split. Because if your one guy has to get over to a switch over here, and your other guy has to get to a switch over here, if you stand too close to one of them, then this one can't reach because when you get out to a certain amount, the thing starts waving, and eventually if you walk too far, you just immediately come back to your normal self. And so like whatever progress you just made is undone. So you're like, so you gotta like really pay attention to where you're
literally to do one thing at that point. You're talking about 3, maybe 4 different things, and it gets crazy.
Yeah,
one other major gameplay thing to mention is in Darksiders 1. Essentially, you got these souls; they were currency, and anything you want to do, you just bought. But there wasn't like you found sword number 2.
Right.
This one is a constant stream of finding new items, new weapons, new whatever. So like,
in Darksiders 1, it's like, here's your items, and you slowly upgrade them over time. This one, it's like World of Warcraft, or it's more like Diablo, in just the sense that you're just like constantly upgrading items. There's legendary items, but like sometimes they're not as good as the one you get rolled on the dice. And it's like, so you're constantly checking stats and this and that. And
when we played Diablo, I think we wouldn't keep a sword for more than 5 minutes sometimes.
Exactly.
You know, especially early on in the game.
Oh, whoa. Right. You know, exactly. It's that same idea. I will say the one thing I really enjoyed specifically the I know this is probably not under gameplay, but I enjoyed that sound effect when you picked up gold. It was very satisfying sound. It was like, cling! And it was just like, it definitely was like, I feel like I'm at a casino, because I'm just like,
Another huge thing, and again, this game ends up being an action RPG.
Yeah.
You level, you get experience.
Right.
Instead of in the first...
You got a gigantic skill tree.
In the first...
That's crazy.
In the first game, usually the only time that you get your health back, unless you like travel or whatever, fast travel, is through boxes that give you that. This one, you use potions.
Right.
You have the same... I forget what they call in Darksiders 1, where you become that huge... guy that can destroy anything. It's called Wrath in this one.
Well, that's the name of the thing.
Gotcha.
No, it's Reaper energy.
I think it's called. I thought it was called Wrath. Like
Wrath was the first one.
Oh, okay. Then it's Reaper.
This is like the Reaper.
That's really cool in that.
Your Wrath. Your Wrath meter's the other thing.
The Wrath is like a magic. So
exactly.
You can,
over time you unlock a skill tree of like things you can do. I don't know. I'm just curious. What did you max out like first, or did you try to like do different stuff?
I'm gonna be dead serious. The skill tree
did you not even bother?
Really confused me.
Gotcha.
So I got to the point where
I found the one.
I'll explain why I did it this way, but I got to the point in the game where I was happy with something that I was just. I did the right one for the most part.
Okay. So you did the one where you create things, create those ghouls.
Yes.
Yeah. I picked that one off the bat. and then completely like upgraded that before I even bothered with anything else. And then the next thing I did was the crows, because I figured that was like another thing to like create and send out.
Yeah.
And so I upgraded that one all the way, and then it was just a choice of whether I wanted to summon ghouls or crows, because the crows would give me life and Reaper, like the ability to turn into like the mega like death and go nuts. And then the ghouls would like just be constant damage. So I kind of a lot of fights, honestly, like I would send the ghouls in and just kind of like hang back, like I like, because they got so powerful towards the end, and then they all had a thing where like they'd fight and then they'd explode when they were done, when you maxed them out, and so they just dealt tons of damage. And when they were fighting, they recharged the magic thing meter that brought them out in the first place.
Right.
So like it was almost just
could
constantly
do it.
summoning them, and I was just like, yeah, whatever.
And that's one of the things that like this game gives you a lot of different options for fighting. There's a lot of fights. There's a lot of platforming. It's a long game.
Yes.
But you know, you could go in and just be like, I'm just going to attack. You also get a secondary weapon. You go, I'm just going to use the secondary weapon.
Absolutely.
You have these,
and the secondary weapon's very different. There's one that's like basically, so you have your scythes, which are pretty fast, and then there's two secondary weapons types. There's one that's faster than a scythe,
right,
which is like these gauntlets, and then there's like much slower than a scythe, but much more powerful, and it's like a giant axe or a giant hammer, where you like slowly swing it, but when you land it, it's like mega damage. So I'm just curious, which route did you go?
Well, in
the
beginning, I went with the heavy thing, but I eventually found a particular weapon, and there were so many switching of weapons, and a lot of the names. This is standard RPG fare.
Oh yeah.
A lot of the names I would like kind of forget what I was using. I found one that was very fast and decently strong, that constantly gave me life and wrath back, and that's like literally in like hard parts in the game all I would use, because it would just be constant. Like my thing was I would use that, get enough wrath back, and then a lot of times I would use the L1 and square, which is just like a big old like circle around.
Yeah,
because it's like it was a very strong move that can kill a lot of enemies at once.
That was like harvest or something.
Whatever, and then sometimes I'd use the one where it drops like the coffin or whatever.
That's the ghouls.
That's the ghouls, right?
Yeah.
So like I said, once I got that point where I was constantly getting life and whatever back, wrath back, it was like, okay, we all right now, because like sometimes I would just just do that to get through harder fights. The game's hard too.
Oh yeah,
pretty dang hard. There were 2 or 3 fights. I think you would laugh if you saw how I did them, where I would like get to a point where like maybe he had a third of his life back. A lot of these bosses don't necessarily do crazy projectile stuff. It's a lot of 1v1 stuff.
Right.
So if you want to, you can circle around it by constantly pressing back and right. And I would literally like
shoot with
the gun for like probably 5 minutes, just because I would be like, okay, here are my choices. Go in and probably lose and do a 10-minute fight again, or be very safe and do 3 to 5 minutes of just literally shooting over and over again until he dies. Yeah. And I did that a couple times because the game's hard. Again, later in the game when you get that ability to like constantly get life back, then it was a little easier. But I did that more than a couple times, where I would just be like, if they couldn't do
some of the bad guys were damage outputters like crazy, like just would wreck you. So like, yeah, you really needed to be careful, like,
and
pay attention.
Games like this where you constantly get to new places, and every new place has very expensive equipment. It's been happening since Dragon Quest,
right? But the one thing that I liked better about Dark Souls 1 is that each boss, even though like in this one you do learn like move sets, it still was like there's a way to beat each boss in Darksiders 1 where you're like kind of optimizing like how much damage you take because you're finding their weak spots. In this one, it's kind of like what reminded me of Diablo in the sense that it's just like
hack and slash.
Yeah, you're just trying to DPS higher than their DPS.
Oh, absolutely.
Where you're just like
that's why it was a game changer. Where it's like, oh, I can do this and also sometimes get life back. It was like game changer.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think overall, when we're talking about gameplay, it's a huge open world game. It's very, you feel cool doing it. Very agile, very fast.
Definitely.
A lot of fun overall. Very RPG-ish, which again is a huge. If I just played this game separate, it'd be like, no, okay, cool. Darksiders 1 must be a huge RPG. Now, so like I said, that's almost universally positive. Let's talk about a little bit of the negatives. It's a big game.
Yeah.
It's not made by Bethesda.
No.
But big games will always have glitches and whatever. So my experience with that, I'm not going to dock it as much as Parker, I think, on this. Yeah. I had a couple times when you enter a new area, and they're huge, it will like kind of, drop pretty low in the frame rate department and whatever.
To, like, load it or whatever.
One thing we didn't even mention, and I will put this on the description, we played on the PS4 one, so the PS3 one could be literally unplayable. We're talking
I have no idea, because the PS4 had some major issues in terms of, like, in my opinion, going as far as I did glitch-wise, that I was like, I can't imagine the PS3 is better. I mean, maybe it is,
I personally only had a couple major glitches. I did have one time where I was fighting a boss, and it just froze.
Crashed.
It just froze.
Yeah, I had like, I think total like 4 or 5 where it's like blue screen.
Oh, you know what? I mean,
actions.
I would probably say 2 or 3 overall. But here's my thing: I don't play games like this, so I don't know if you're playing. I can't use a Bethesda game because they're bad. But
they're terrible. But
Dragon Age. Let's pretend.
Yeah,
Witcher. Okay, that's a good one, right? I don't know how often when you're playing Witcher, where you're playing. I probably play this game 20 dang hours.
Right.
Where it's like I don't know how many times that's expected to happen. Yep. Like in a perfect world, of course, 0, but it's a huge game.
Right. So we're not talking like Final Fantasy VII or something, where it's like big, but like. I guess more stable or whatever.
Well, because of the way they load, it's more self-contained, where this loads huge areas. One other particularly funny glitch I had was, and Parker had this as well, I was just playing at one part, and like the sound got desynced.
Yeah, it's like most of the sound cuts out except for a few sounds.
And it was really I had fun with it, because glitches are usually fun unless they're like happen at a very serious moment. So I was just going around beating up stuff, and once in a while
it was mostly quiet.
It would be like this. And like that, there's no music. Once in a while, you would like stripped. You would do a certain move where it would be like, and it's just like I don't know if you saw.
I don't know if you saw they accidentally released the Mummy trailer. By accident, they released a version of the new Mummy. A trailer for it.
I saw
where
they're doing that.
None of the sound or none of the music was in it. And in all of it, like, there's parts where, like, the people get thrown off a plane, and they're like, oh! Like, and that's, like, how it sounds. But, like, you realize that when it's in a trailer and there's all the music and all the sound effects,
well, that's huge for a trailer.
When you hear that guy go, oh, it, like, fits. But when it's completely isolated, it sounds so dumb. And it was just like, ugh! Ah!
I can't do the
Wilhelm scream. Yeah. Like it's like, but with like no other
Sorry,
sound.
Headphone users.
Like,
I did put my hand in front of my thing, but that was
funny.
Was
it happened to me though a lot. Probably happened to me like once a play session. That's how I determined like, okay, I'm probably done soon. Because like it was almost like if I played for more than a couple hours at a time, it would happen. Like I needed to like stop and restart.
And my experience was it was like I also got lucky. Again, everything happened. It all depends on your time. But it was like late at night, and I was like, I'm done soon, and it happened, and I was like. I literally might have been like, I'm done, but then that happened, and I was like, I'll play a little more, because it was silly, so it was more funny to me. Again, if it happened all the time, I'd be like, cool.
Okay, game.
And luckily, games like this have so many autosaves that,
when
it crashed, screen, it was like, you restarted,
it really wasn't that bad.
Okay. But
it wasn't like it wasn't like a case where you're like, all that work, like it was just like, oh, I'm right at the beginning of the boss fight. Okay, whatever.
So one last thing to mention real quick is the way we play games. This, unless I specifically say otherwise, this is always how I do them. I do story stuff, and if I am so inclined, I may do side quest stuff.
Right. Whereas, I think you did that in some of the Batmans because you were like, I really like this world, I want to keep playing it a little bit.
But I did everything.
Not the crazy side quests, but like so some of the simple ones.
Right. The simple ones, I'll be like, oh, cool, done with that.
Right.
Whereas,
Whereas I like to do all the things. And this game is a game that... the problem is, it's a game like we've played in the past and complained about, where they set a million tasks, like so many, that you're like, this is going to take a lot of replays. But the issue with this one was not so much that, it was the fact that, like, the collectibles. So there was like 3 or 4 different major collectibles, right? And they were all like, there was like 2 of the 4 of them were like, they gave, like, you had a number of like how many there were left, kind of thing.
Okay.
But then the other 2 it was a collectible there was like, the things were in very specific spots all around the world, but the way you spent them was just like money. So like,
what, those boatman coins?
The boatman coins.
Okay.
So like, it's very frustrating if you're like somebody who enjoys collecting stuff, because it's not a collectible.
It doesn't even appear on
sense.
the screen.
It doesn't say you have 100 left.
It doesn't
or
appear on the sub screen.
Right. It's just a thing. But like, if it's gonna be something like that, then it should be just randomly generated in hidden spots, which would be like annoying in one sense. But as soon as I found out they were randomly generated, I would feel much better about like not bothering with them.
Right.
But because it's like, oh, there's like 150, but they're in very specific spots. But basically, what it comes down to, when you use them, they're not even really worth anything. Like, you use them with Grim, that demon guy from Dark Souls 1 or Darksiders 1. You use it to buy a mystery chest, basically. And depending on how much you spend, it's like a more powerful mystery chest. And then you don't know what you're going to get, which is kind of fun at some point. But then you realize that the stuff you get just from going out in the world is usually infinitely better. Or if you open a chest, you'll go, this thing's awesome, for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to find something better. Yeah. So it's like, all of that is like, there's no like, oh, that's cool. It's just like, oh, great, okay. Like, it was very, that left a sour taste in my mouth. Like, from the perspective of somebody that likes doing the side quests and doing the collectibles, it was like, oh, none of that matters. And then on top of it, when you go to like New Game Plus, because this game wants you to replay it so badly, it resets everything. So it's like not like, oh, well, at least on New Game Plus I still like have X number of collectibles done, I'll just get the rest. It was like, whatever. And on top of it, so their one collectible is these Book of the Dead pages, and when you collect 10 of them, you get a key.
Can I say, the second I started this game and I found the first one, which was probably not the first one,
right,
and it said, collect 10 to create a chapter, I said, nope.
And there's 4 chapters.
I literally got 6 the whole game. Now, if I saw it,
right,
and it was right there, I'd pick it up.
Right, absolutely.
But I wouldn't go out of my way for it.
Of course.
And so I found 6 out of 40 in the entire effing game.
So I found all but 5 of the Book of the Dead pages. And the reason I did find all but 5 was because I realized the futility of collecting these in this game was just like, they really was like no incentive, because it was like whatever. So when you find 10, Grim gives you a key, and there's a hidden, not hidden, I mean, there's just basically, there's this door that you may have walked past where it had like 4 colors. It was like 4 gems of color or whatever. And it's like a door that you probably were like, what's that? But then never bothered with. But like that door, if you get a key, you can unlock 1 on each world. So there's 1 in the Maker, 1 in, Kingdom of the Dead, Lost Light, and the final, whatever that one was called. So you open that, and then basically it's like a giant treasure room. There's like 1,000,000 treasure chests. There's piles of gold everywhere. There's a bunch of like items. There's a bunch of like things that have items in them and all this stuff. And then there's like usually a couple skill points hidden in there and all sorts of stuff. So it definitely like when you're first playing the game, it definitely is like, I should get these as quickly as possible because this will benefit me in early game versus late game when you're like, these weapons are fine. I don't really find anything that's really good, really better. And so then you don't really even bother collecting anything at that point. But the problem is, some of the, like when you open a Book of the Dead tomb or whatever, there were other collectibles in a couple of them. So it's like, you can't be like, oh, well, on this playthrough, I'll only collect this. You have to make the decision to collect all of everything.
Woo!
And it's just like,
Woo,
are you kidding me? So it was very frustrating.
That our scores will differ because mine was like, I literally never once in the entire game went to an objective marker that wasn't like, here's your objective marker.
Right.
And I would just go straight to it. So my experience was fantastic.
Right.
I love this game.
Right.
I really did. Like, this is like...
Which I was surprised at. I honestly, when the game started,
right?
I was like, Spencer's going to hate this game.
No,
like, I immediately
thought
that.
Because until today, we like hinted at it, but like I would always be like, tell me when you start Darksiders 2, because it's different. It's different. And literally, like, I wanted to, 5 minutes into the game, be like, I hate this game. All the stuff together, I, like, kind of instantly grew on me.
Yeah.
You know, just being like,
I think that what helps is that you did really like and have good memories of Prince of Persia, and there's so much of that in this, and it's so well done.
Yes.
Like, I remember playing Prince of Persia, liking it, but still getting frustrated at hell about wall running. I could never get it right.
Oh, it was just like
wall running was like, you had to be perfect at it, or it was no good. And in this, it's like, it's so streamlined that I felt like such a badass.
You press like 4 buttons, and it's like you seem so dang cool.
That's pretty.
That
great.
one, I mean, the great example of that is that one. It's happened somewhere where like lava or fire's rising up this room.
Oh,
and you have to like
that
constantly
cool.
go up it, and there's always like a new like, oh crap, I gotta do this. You know, and it's very specific.
And sometimes you have to go down.
It died like,
which is like,
it died like 7 times on it, and I had a really good time.
But you weren't angry. Exactly.
Yeah, it was just like very well done. So, like I said, I had a fantastic experience, and I did not expect to.
Right.
This is, I have my paperwork right here. This is the highest gameplay grade I've given, because it was like, the story was, again, kind of whatever to me. The other stuff was whatever. Super, super good time. 9.5. I know we're gonna change, but seriously, I had such a good time. Like,
that's awesome.
Like, it was just like, you know, it had, I guess, clearly like problems, but they were all like endearing. Where it was like any game where it's like, you know, oh well, yeah, I got a really good time. Like, I would find a million items and be like, well, they're all useless. Ching, 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 ching. Like selling them all, and I was like, yeah, buddy. So I don't know. And it was a game. I mean, I look at it this way: it was like a 20-hour game, main game, and I beat it. How could I give it anything less than like a 9? I never do that. I never ever do that. Like, I played Fallout 3 for 30 minutes, and everyone's like, I love Fallout 3, and I'm like, you know, I played it for 30 minutes, whatever.
Yeah, and like, I'm with you. Like, the gameplay, the items, the items, like, as far as like the quest items that you get, that you use, are all so cool, and the puzzle stuff was so cool that, like, I feel like I want to give it a 9 in that regard, but then because like that other stuff, the collectible side of things, and the fact that it, like, if you're going to go the route of the collectible stuff, you're going to be playing for longer periods of time, and when you're playing for longer periods of time, the chance of the glitches is higher. Like, you were saying, you hit it a few times, but you were probably playing for like, you know, chunks of time, and then you're done. And if something happened towards the end of your time, you'd go, oh, well, I was done anyway, no big deal. But when you're like, okay, I have, you know, 4 hours that I can do a bunch of collectibles. And so the other issue with collectibles is that you're moving from world to world a lot.
That would
you're
be
jumping
so
around,
annoying.
You're running around, you're constantly
it's
jumping.
So huge.
The one side mission literally involved, so you're in Lost Light, and there was that one angel that you liked that was a good friend of yours. He's like, oh, here's this scroll, go talk to this guy. You go talk to the guy, and he's like, that's nonsense. So you go back to the angel, and he's like, oh, well, go call to this person. And you go talk to that person, and he's like, that's dumb. And then you go back to the angel, and you go, oh, here you go. And he's like, oh, finally talk to this person. And all you did was go and talk to a person and come back. And it was like, that mission took like 20, 30 minutes of time, just because to get to, even just to fast travel, you still, from wherever the fast travel point was, you had to run to the portal. You get to the portal, you fast travel, then you run to the point where the guy is. It's just like just frustrating, because then you're also worried about, what if it crashes, and then I have to redo this whole thing. Like, then it does matter. Normally when it crashes, like if you're in a boss battle, it crashes, you're brought to the beginning of the boss battle, you're not really that upset, right? But when you've done like 30 minutes of a 40-minute fetch quest, and then it crashes and you're like, where am I? Like, it's like, this is very frustrating.
Yeah,
so,
I could totally see that.
So I'm gonna I want to I want to give it a 9 because the gameplay is really cool, but I want to give it a 2 because of all this nonsense because it was that bad, and it was to the point where I gave up. Like, I didn't even finish all the side quests because I got that frustrated with it that I was like, I'm done. So I have to just give it a medium 5 because that's my average because I loved it, but I hated it.
I figured we would come to a thing like that because of how our gameplay style. Right. One last we've talked way much about it, but one last gameplay thing I forgot to mention. My favorite part is when you go to Earth and you pick up those awesome machine guns.
Yeah, those are cool.
It essentially becomes like a third person, almost like Gears of War style thing where you're just like constantly shooting down foes.
Well, that did happen in the first one. You did get those guns.
Yeah, I guess this one just felt a little more like specific because it was like a specific area for it. So, like I said, I really
that was cool.
Really
and there was 2 choices for guns because like I chose the grenade launcher one where it like shoots a grenade and then you press another button to blow it up.
If you played any of the side missions, not literally the side missions, but the ones on the main page of the game, that ice one, you're like forced to do it for all the parts.
Gotcha.
The grenade. Right, so I ended up doing both of them. So enough of the gameplay. We're going over to sound. I don't have much to say here. I feel like we say this every time we do a game. I really enjoyed the voice acting. The music was very forgettable.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't like.
I do like the sound effects, like I said about the
sound effects were cool. Yeah,
some of the picking up stuff was really cool. Which, by the way, did you like see that there's an option in the options screen for like automatic pickup?
Oh, I turned it on.
Right, but it's like, why even have that off?
Oh, right.
Like, who in their right mind's like, nah?
Like, it was like 5 minutes, and I was like, because you have to like constantly press triangle or whatever.
I'm like, nah.
I couldn't imagine, because like, if there was a game like Baldur's Gate, Dark Alliance, where you constantly had this like, because Ben and Trev just played that game, and that was running out of space, and that was a constant annoyance.
That's understandable.
But this, you could carry. I think there's are there a limited amount of spaces? I always sold stuff beforehand. I don't think there's any limited spaces.
I mean, if there is, it would be a lot.
You could literally just pick up everything, and then eventually I would check the stuff when I went to like the local dealer, and then I'd be like, well, what do I got? Okay, cool, and switch it out. But I don't know why you would ever want to do that. So the Death's voice, the Maker's voices, everyone does a really good job with their voice. There's no one that's like. Besides Death, there's no one that super stand out like a Mark Hamill, what Joker would be, but like overall they do a really good job, especially in a game where there's like decent amount of dialogue. You know, like
absolutely.
When games like this, when they sit down to read them, they have a ton of lines to read. So
most of this story is presented through dialogue. Like there's some cutscenes, but it's mostly just you talking to people to find out everything. So.
Yep. So if you're looking at it, and I'm like, music was so forgettable that it's a 5. Not bad, not great. And I really like the sound effects and the whatever. I'm probably looking at a 7 overall for the sound. I feel like I say it for literally every game, but it's like in games that have great music, they generally aren't heavy on the sound or on the maybe like some game we do where there's no like talking. We'll be like 10 music because that's all it had.
Yeah. I thought I'm gonna bump it up a little higher just because I really loved that. I mean, that was one of the things that like really kept me going as far as like collecting was the sound of that coins. I just loved it. It was like a jingle jangle. It was like awesome. It was like a casino where you're just like like I want to spend money here, even though you're like I know this is a bad idea, but it's just like they know the sounds to make you go. This place seems like really good. So I'm going to bump it up to an 8 for sound because I did really, really love Death's voice. I mean, he was a good character. You would not expect that
from you hear Death and whatever. But it's like, it was literally, I don't know how to like redo it, but it was like, and what will you have me do? Something like that, where it's like,
and sometimes he would get a little like annoying. It's like, I suppose you want me to help you with something, and it's like that kind of thing where it's like making a joke about it, but also like pretty serious about most things. But I really appreciated that a lot.
So moving on to graphics and atmosphere, I'm very mixed on this one because the character models and stuff, the dungeons and everything, it's all good, it's all crisp. But it's a big game, so it's not going to be as pretty as a not big game.
Right. Yeah, there were a few moments where there was some weird, like, there was one specific character. I don't know if it happened for you or if it was just me, but there was one, when you would go to Earth, there was this one demon-y thing that would, like, explode, and he had, like, fire all over him, and for whatever reason, the fire looked like absolute garbage. Like, it was like, if I, like, looked at the character, like, I mean, unfortunately, he was running really fast, or I should say fortunately, because he was running so fast that you couldn't really pay attention to him too close. But there was a few moments where I got a chance to, like, look at him, and things were calm, and the fire was, like, blocky. Huh. Like, it was like PS1 low
and
res.
Otherwise,
right. I mean, game. It was beautiful otherwise, like HD, and then it's like, what is that? So, yeah, I mean, clearly, obviously, also a PS3 game, up-res to a PS4 game. Like, you could tell that kind of feel that when we play these remasters. It doesn't feel like, you know, RE7, where it's, like, built from ground up on PS4. It's like, okay, yeah, this is definitely a sign of the time. And like you said, it is a big game, so obviously, you got to cut costs somewhere. You got to cut resources somewhere. You can't have everything.
The part of this category where it shines is the atmosphere, which is just like a world built, not necessarily settings, but like the feel, and every place has a unique feel.
Definitely.
Angelic or demonic, or Makers is like Middle Earth, you know, kind of thing going on. So it just, if I'm looking at that alone, it's like a 9. If I'm looking at like the graphics alone, it's like a 6 or 7. So I'm sitting comfortably at a 7.5.
Yeah, I would give it a 7, definitely. I bumped it down a little bit because there were a few of those, you know, graphic-y glitches that I was like, but overall it looked great. Like, and the design I liked a lot, like the character design for sure. The enemy design, excellent, like, and very different world to world, which I really appreciated. Like, that was cool.
So next up is one that I think we're going to disagree on a lot as well, is fun factor. I generally had fun in this game. There were, if I were to look at my negatives, there were times where some of the dungeons were so big that, like, I would get to the point in the dungeon that I have to be, and then I have to walk back to the, there's a great example, I think it was semi-early on, where you have to, like, turn on this huge being who's in the center of this one dungeon. I think it's in the Maker world, right? So
yes,
right. So you have to like start. You have to start with these 3.
You have to put the 3 stones into him,
and like
everything's 3 in this.
It's
game.
Always 3, and it was like cool, but it was to the point where it's like, man, there's like, you know, you would get to the very end, and then you would have to like be like, got my thing, gotta walk back.
Yeah.
And some of that stuff was a little frustrating, but again, a game that can take so many like. A bad game could have taken Soul Split, the idea, and made it like the worst idea of all time. That you'd be like, because like they really took their chances here. Again, you have a portal gun, you have a time hop thing, you have a Soul Split. In an even average game would be the most annoying things of all time, right?
Absolutely. And when you especially combining them, like some games would just be like this, like, you know, in Zelda they do it. This dungeon is this dungeon, and it's the only place you use this, and you'll never use it anywhere else. And this game's like, you'll use them in conjunction with each other, and that's like, whoa.
To make puzzles and stuff like that involve all and aren't like impossible and don't have like 50 million ways to do it is like very. I was floored by that, and I had a lot of fun with that. So, I think overall, even with a few annoyances, I'm looking at an 8.5. I really, again, I didn't do all the side quests, but I really had a good time.
I think that I'm hitting the same thing I did with gameplay, where it's like the fun factor on just the basic stuff, I want to give a 9, but the fun factor on like when I get any further, I want to give a lower score. So I think I gotta bump to a 6. I'm gonna bump it up. I'm not gonna go to 5 like I did for gameplay, because I did have fun even when because I did collect a lot of stuff. I just hit a wall, but like up to that point I was mostly enjoying it. You know, the collecting part, which like I always do the collecting with a grain of salt. Like, I'm aware that the collecting part is going to have annoying parts. That's fine. I'm granted that. Like, when I was complaining about that one fetch quest where I'm running back and forth, I wouldn't even complain about that normally, because, like, that's what what you do when you do all the side quests and all the collectibles. I'm so used to that. But the problem is when there's a little bit of glitch throw in there, and you throw in a little bit of some other things where it's like, oh, you didn't quite do it right. Now you're getting frustrated. Like, now I'm angry because I'm like, I wanted to enjoy this, and I was willing to put up with quite a bit, like usually. So it's like you really tried my patience there, and so I'll go to a 6 for fun factor.
Last up, we have replayability. My thoughts on this are kind of two ways. The first is I could see myself playing this again because I had fun. Right, and it's again, a very high score on this is I started it right away. Which no, I put a different game. Like the second I switched, I moved. The second I finished, I moved on to the next game we're doing, and right. I was like, done, cool, great, uninstall, kind of thing. But so I don't even know how to put this. I'm leaning more than a 5. Because it's like, it's a game that I would want to, that I'm not so average on it that I'm like, yeah. But then I remember it's a very long game, and it bumps me down a little bit because it's like, you can redo, even if I wanted to redo Batman Arkham Asylum again, it's like, I can blow through it in 4 or 5 hours. Maybe, if I just like, fly through.
Right.
It's like, there's no flying through this game. It's like so much, so right. complicated and whatever. So, whereas I might be sitting at a 6 and 6.5 to be like, I see myself having fun in the future. I'm bumping it down to a 5, which is just right. Because of the length, it's like, boy, that would be an undertaking, right. to redo it again.
Plus, like, the enjoyment of some of the puzzles would be gone. Like, you might not remember how to do them, but, like, you'd know how to do them enough that it wouldn't be, like, really starting from square one, So, like, you would just go, oh, this is that part that takes a long time, and then you'd have to do it. It'd be like, okay. So... For replayability, the thing is, like, I think, when we talked about RE6, where they showed you the skill points tree, and it was like, you have to play this game.
That was Revelations 2.
Oh, right.
Revelations 2.
I mean, RE6 did it, but Rev 2 was, like, really bad, where it was like, you have to play this game like 1,000 times. They present this game... looking through some of the sub-menus and looking through some of the through the side missions, they present this game as wanting you to replay it over and over, because they even have in the stats section, they have a thing where it's like how long you've played, and then they have a thing where it's like fastest game completion, longest game completion,
wow,
like whatever, longest game completion with side quests, all this stuff. So it's like they want you to replay it and like be like, oh, I'm gonna beat my score or whatever, and it's like, no. And
in a 2-3 like in a Silent Hill game, great 2-3 hours, but
right.
like in a 20-hour game,
right? Like I think they wanted it to be Diablo. Like Diablo, people still play Diablo 2 or Diablo 3. Like it's been out for how long? I mean, Diablo 2 especially. Diablo 2's been out forever. They just did an update because people are still playing that game for all this time. You can replay it. I mean, some people might not want to, but like if you really like it, it keeps you coming back. There's stuff to do, at least like there's something to work towards or whatever, optimize and this and that. But there's none of that in here, so it's like they present that replayability without actually giving you anything to replay, like to even want to. So it's like I was really like kind of. This is where I was even. This is the initial thing where I was like, okay, I'm done with this, because I was seeing what they were trying to do, and it was like, that's not fun to me. Like, just to be like, oh yeah, you can't. Like in Diablo, it's like they don't present anything as being like, here's a collectible. It's like, oh, there's just crap everywhere, and you don't know what you're gonna get, and it's all random, and it's all like generated. You know what I mean? Like there's a few sets of armor or weapons you can try to look for, but for the most part, you don't even know what you're gonna get with stats or anything. Whereas this one, it's like, oh, there are collectibles, but you don't carry those over, and you'll gotta refine them all, and this and that. And it's just like, so for replayability on this, I gotta put it at like a 3, because there's no chance I would put this game in again at this point. Like, I don't want to give it a 0 because that just seems mean. I did enjoy it, and like, if somebody was like playing it and they were like, "Can you beat this part?" I wouldn't be like, "Get away from me." I'd be like, "Okay." So I mean, I'm not gonna whatever. But
I think we were saying a 0 would be like cause physical pain, you
Right,
know,
yeah,
where it's
yeah,
just
yeah.
like, ah.
But I definitely can't give it an average because I'm like, there's no chance. And
And a lot of other games like that, Diablo 3 has that end game stuff. Is there any like post game stuff? Like, is there like
that I'm aware of.
Like, is there
mean,
like a like?
Oh yes, there is one thing. But I started it and then it crashed, and I was like, "F this." So there's actually 2, but one was a little bit easier. There's this area called the Soul Arbiters area where you basically go 10 levels, and if I explain this to you, you'd be like, why would anybody do this? But basically it's like you enter a room and there's 4 cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, right? And so you get into a room and you're like, okay, you have to go, every time you enter one of the rooms with the 4 doors, a bunch of enemies spawn, right? After they spawn, you pick a direction. Now, over the course of the game, you collected these Soul Arbiter scrolls, and they told you level 1 is north, south, east to get to a secret chest.
I found that stuff, and I never even tried.
So it'll be like level 1 is north, south, east to get to a secret chest, and then, or if you don't want the secret chest, it's south, west, west, and then you get out, right, and then you get to the next level. You got to go down 10 levels. When you get down to the lower levels, the directions are like, west, west, south, north, east. So it's like a bunch, right? But keep in mind, every time you go west, you enter a room, a bunch of enemies spawn. You kill them all, the doors open. Then you go 1 cardinal direction north. You're in the exact same room, a bunch of enemies spawn. And at different combinations of enemies. And then,
oh my God.
So that's one of them. And then the other area you may have encountered with the serpent scroll or serpent thing. It was like this thing about the crucible.
I read that, but I never did anything.
Yeah, it was like the sword and the lost and the this. You go to this crucible and there's one location on every world, and it's again just waves of enemies. And it's waves of enemies like 100 waves of enemies. And if you do all 100 waves of enemies without being hurt, without being hit once, then you get this thing. If you do 100 waves of enemies without, like, dying, you get this thing. And then that's where you meet up with that guy that I talked about in the first one. Capital J or Mr. H or whatever his name is. Yeah. And he's like, hello, good chap. He shows up in the Crucible as well. So there is some post-game content that might keep you coming back for more, but like it wasn't like the combat wasn't this game's strong suit. Like if it was a recurring set of puzzles, jump puzzles and platforming, it still might be a lot, but at least I'd be like, okay, that seems like something because it took you effort to build a bunch of puzzles for me to solve. Right. Whereas this is just like, throw these 10 enemies in, throw this 6 enemies in, throw these 10. That's so like, that takes no effort on the game designer, and it's just like, yeah, try to do it, and it's like maybe they balanced it where it's doable, and maybe they didn't. Maybe they were just like, try these 5 enemies. Well, that's like really hard to do. Who cares? Like, they'll figure it out. And it's just like, okay, great. So now you gotta grind for 1,000,000 years in order to figure out how to do it. It's like, okay, no thanks. Like, that just seems like
I would not
spit in the face.
I would not want to do any of those things at all. So, when we're looking at the overall scores, this is actually, to my knowledge, the biggest, difference we've had, which is kind of, I thought it would be a little more, but it's the biggest one we've had. Mine came out to an average of 7.42. And yours came out to an average of 5.83, which is, roughly 1.5 points. I thought it might end up being 2 or 3, but stuff like, you generally like in the graphics and the sound and whatever definitely helped out on that. So, like I said, it's definitely a game with its flaws. If you're gonna play it, maybe don't just play it. I mean, sometimes I. Because we both have these styles of play, it's very interesting, the sides of the coin, sometimes, like in the Batman games, where I'm like, nah, whatever. Parker will be like, oh, did you find the warden's office in Arkham Asylum where you find this huge thing? And I'm like, dang it, I wish I did. But in this one, like, and I was like very, very jealous and, considered kicking him off the podcast and all this stuff. But then there's something like this where he's like, I did this and it was really annoying and I got nothing out of it. Then I'm like, hey, my style of gameplay's all right.
Exactly.
So it's
it pays off sometimes. Like, playing through Doom, it's like, oh, whoa, I found out all this cool story stuff. And then it's like, playing through this, I'm like, I want to gouge my eyes out. So, yeah, it definitely, there's something to be said about just enjoying the game and not getting bogged down by all the extra stuff.
I'll never like get into the mindset of a person who does trophies like
imagine somebody like collecting a bunch of stuff, like collecting something and being like, I'm gonna collect all of this, like I'm gonna collect all Sega Saturn games, or I'm gonna collect all the this. Imagine it'd be the dumbest person. I can't imagine it.
No, I meant like trophies in game, because that's not a tangible thing that's cool.
Oh, right. A tangible thing that's cool, like Sega Saturn games.
What about 3DO games? Isn't that at the point where it's pretty cool? So at this point in our reviewing podcast, I think we have one more Batman game. For those of you following along, it's not going to be a surprise. It's going to be Arkham Origins.
I mean, maybe two more.
If
we finish that one, the George's VR one.
Oh, yeah.
I'd review that.
We'll leave that one as a surprise, and that would be a more succinct one. So we got one, maybe two more Batman-themed things, and I think at this point we're going to start changing it up a little bit, because I think literally every game we've done besides Origins coming up
Origins
is PS4. So I think at this point we're going to change it up a little bit. Not necessarily do retro, but just kind of change it up.
We're just gonna do all the Pokemon games.
It's tough, because when I'm thinking about these games, it doesn't even necessarily have to be games that we both like. In fact, finding a game that one of us likes and one of us hates, would be a very interesting thing. But it's a matter of like some of the old retro games. Like I'm like, okay, well, what if we did Super Mario RPG? I wouldn't have a single bad thing to say about it.
Right.
What's the point of having a review where it's like, I would literally, like, if I give it anything less than a 9.5 or possibly perfect 10s, I'd be like, well, I'm just lying to myself, Or it's like, well, let's review Mario 3. Well, in this level, you run left to right. So we're kind of searching for games for that, because for a very complicated game like Darksiders or Batman, you can talk about it for an hour and a half and whatever. Mm-hmm. Some of these older and some of these more simplistic games, it's like,
oh, we're gonna play Mario 3. Okay, story.
2 minutes in, yep. It's like gameplay. Well, it's great. It feels good when you play it. Like your character moves good. So, like I said, we're kind of looking for stuff where we're not going to end up just being like my PS4, straight on that.
Right. So smash that like button. Comment below. I'm pointing down below the video right now.
Below, and let us know what you want to see.
What do you want
we don't guarantee of doing the first one. Could you imagine if just like 3 people were like, oh, you should do, I don't know.
Oh, do Darksiders 3. Or Dark Souls 3.
Yeah.
No thanks.
Do Skyrim.
Do Fallout 4, please.
Do
please
what are those
those
dungeon crawler games where you like constant the
roguelike
the roguelike games
where it's just like always generated.
Do a roguelike game. Well, in my playthrough, it was awful.
Do Binding of Isaac.
Yeah, because that one.
What's the what's the gameplay? Well, I played as this character. You have to play as these 75 other characters in order to actually get the real game. Okay, sounds good. I'll see you in 7 years when we finally played this game enough.
So yeah, we'll try to switch it up a little bit on that. But like I said,
I think next is Mega Man Soccer, so that's gonna be
good. Baby. And I'm just gonna look at games off my shelf.
Swamp Thing.
Jackie Chan's Action Kung Fu for NES. Got a lot to say about that one.
We do have to play Secret in the Basement. That's the next game we gotta play.
Gosh. Yes, we gotta play. I mean, that one's gonna be great.
Absolutely.
As well as Gronk's statue. That's a wonderful. One.
So speaking of some games or whatever, I've been seeing a lot about these Outlast games. They seem interesting. I don't know if that if that
Wait, are
interests
you?
at all.
I can't. Sometimes I can't tell if you're actually trolling me.
It's like a horror game, right?
Yeah.
Have
So
you played them yet?
I actually haven't, and I was
Okay.
gonna mention we should
'Cause
probably.
Outlast 2 just came out?
Well, no. Here's the thing. Outlast Trinity.
Okay, so
just came out.
Right.
It's 1, 2, and then like some
extra
bonus thing. Right.
Okay.
It's a physical thing. It just came out on Tuesday
for PS4?
I literally have it upstairs, and I was gonna start it as my next game.
There you
So
go.
hey guys, guess what you're gonna see soon? Probably
Horror!
I was actually that's funny because when we were done, I was gonna be like, we should do Outlast, you know.
Cool,
and I have
yeah.
a feeling it's gonna be one of those games we're gonna have a stark
Difference
of opinions on. So all right.
I may or may not finish it because I'm too scaredy pants.
Oh my gosh. I just want to mention that I finished this by watching a Let's Play on YouTube. Great game. Great game.
But I also took this picture off because it was too scary. I was too spooked.
Too spooby for you. So anyway, we'll see you guys next time with
Yep.
some more
Reviews.
video games. Bye.